Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive into another mystery.
Always.
Okay, good. Because today we're tackling the Picts.
Oh, excellent choice.
Yeah, they're one of those ancient cultures that just sparks curiosity. So much mystery surrounds them. And today we're not just hitting the usual historical highlights.
Right.
We're really going deeper. We're going to be looking at how outsiders, people from completely different worlds, how they perceive the Picts.
It's like trying to understand a friend, but all you have are descriptions from their rivals.
No, that's a perfect analogy.
And maybe a few people who are trying to convert them to a new way of thinking. You get information, sure, but it's heavily filtered.
Yeah, it's like we're piecing together a puzzle, but the pieces are warped. And those pieces, well, they come from Roman accounts, writings from early Christian monks. We've even got some analysis of those, those super mysterious Pictish symbols.
Exactly. And it's those filters, those biases that can be just as revealing as the information itself.
It's like they tell us as much about the people doing the describing as about the Picts themselves. I was just reading this account by the Roman poet Claudian. He was describing the Picts. He mentions them having, quote, strange devices tattooed on their faces, end quote.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it's intriguing on its own, right? But then you realize it says a lot about how the Romans viewed beauty, civilization, what it meant to be, quote, civilized.
Oh, absolutely. The Romans, as we know, very strong us versus them mentality. You were either Roman or you were a barbarian. And the Picts, well, they resisted Roman expansion for centuries. So definitely fell into the them category.
You can practically feel the Roman disapproval just oozing from their accounts. I was reading Ammianus Marcellinus earlier.
Oh, yes.
And he talks about this Roman general, Botinus, who was sent to deal with the Picts in the 4th century. And he describes him as, warlike.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. You'd expect that from a Roman general.
Right, standard job description.
But then Marcellinus adds this detail. He says Lupicinus was also known for being either covetous or cruel. And it just makes you wonder, did those qualities influence how he dealt with the Picts?
It's an excellent question. Were the Picts really as savage as the Romans portrayed them? Or was that image shaped by Roman justifications for conquest? After all, if you're trying to conquer a people, painting them as a threat makes things easier.
Right. It's like maybe those Roman accounts played up the Pictish fierceness, their so-called barbarity, to make Roman victories seem even more impressive.
Exactly. And that's why it's so essential to approach these sources critically. Always consider the context, the motivations, any potential biases the authors might have had.
Okay, so we've got the Roman perspective. But what happens when we shift gears? When we look at writings from early Christian monks?
Oh, fascinating shift in perspective. We're talking about people like Bede, Adam Fruman.
Right, folks who are very much on a mission. They were out to spread the Christian gospel.
Their views, understandably, are colored by that religious lens. They don't see the Picts as enemies to conquer. They see them as potential converts.
Right. It's a whole different kind of us versus them dynamic now. This time it's about spiritual conquest.
Exactly. And this plays out in stories like, well, there's the one about St. Columba, the Irish missionary who traveled to Picklin in the 6th century. And in essence, he has this showdown with Pictish priests, probably Druids, at a sacred well. It's this clash of cultures, belief systems, playing out on a spiritual battlefield.
It's like those epic movie scenes. 2 armies facing off before a big battle, except this battle's for souls, not territory. So how do these Christian sources, with their focus on conversion, shape our understanding of Pictish culture?
Even in supposedly objective historical chronicles, like, well, Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English People, there's this tendency, the Picts are almost always presented in relation to the spread of Christianity. It becomes this narrative of the triumph of Christianity over paganism. It doesn't quite give us a nuanced exploration of Pictish culture on its own terms.
So we've got all these biases swirling around. What can we actually learn about how the Picts lived? It feels like we're trying to see through this thick fog, getting glimpses here and there, but never the full picture.
It's a challenge, definitely. But despite those distortions, those glimpses can be fascinating.
Okay, I'm all ears. What kind of glimpses?
Well, even the Roman accounts, biased as they might be, make one thing clear. The Picts were skilled warriors.
Oh, for sure.
They held off the mighty Roman army for centuries. That's not easy to do.
Right. You don't keep the Roman legions at bay without serious military skills. What else?
We also get hints about their social structure. There are mentions of Pictish kings, nobles, suggesting some kind of hierarchy, organization. And while their beliefs are still shrouded in mystery, those encounters between St. Columba and the Pictish priests, they hint at something, a deep connection to nature, to spirits, a worldview that clearly clashed with the Christian perspective.
It's like we're getting these flashes, these quick glimpses of a vibrant, complex culture, but the lens we're looking through keeps distorting the image.
Precisely. It's like, imagine trying to understand a symphony, but all you have are the notes played by a single instrument.
Okay, so we've got these tantalizing hints about their warriors, their social structure, their spiritual beliefs. What else can we piece together from these sources? What other clues are out there?
Well, there are some intriguing anecdotes that give us more specific insights into Pictish life, but we'll need to delve a bit deeper into those. One that immediately comes to mind is from Adamnan's Life of St. Columba. He describes the scene where the saint blesses a spring.
Okay.
And this spring was revered by the Picts, but to others it was considered poisonous. It's this tiny little detail, but it's packed with meaning.
Yeah, I see why you picked that one. On the surface, it seems like, oh, just another saint performing a miracle. But yeah, there's definitely more to it. What else is going on there?
Exactly. I mean, for one thing, it highlights that clash, the one between Christian beliefs and those Pictish traditions.
Right.
You know, the Picts, they probably saw the spring as sacred, maybe even, like connection to the spirits. But for people outside their culture, danger, something to fear.
It really makes you wonder what stories the Picts themselves had about that well, what myths, beliefs were tied to it. And, I mean, countless other places in their land, too, right? It's like we're catching these glimpses of their spiritual world, but it's always through someone else's eyes, someone who saw it as something to, like, conquer.
Precisely. And it also reminds us that even with those clashes, there were moments of exchange. Columba, by blessing the well, it's like he's acknowledging its importance to the Picts, even if his ultimate goal was to, convert them.
It's a good reminder that history isn't always so black and white. It's not always just conqueror versus the conquered.
Right.
There's nuance, there's blending, even when there's conflict. Okay, so we've talked about glimpses into their spiritual world, their warrior culture. What about everyday life? Do we know anything about how they lived, their jobs, how their society was organized?
Well, the sources we have, they mostly focus on the big stuff, battles, conversions, who's in charge. But you do find these little nuggets, little hints about daily life scattered throughout. Like, for example, Roman accounts talk about the Picts practicing tattooing. Or maybe body painting. It's hard to say for sure.
Ah, the tattoos. The Romans were certainly fascinated by those. Not always in a positive way, though, right?
Right. They often saw those tattoos as like a mark of barbarity. But for the Picts, I mean, who knows? Those designs probably had deep meaning, maybe clan affiliation, a way to express your identity. It's just another reminder that what one culture sees as quote unquote civilized, another might see as strange, threatening even.
It's like those old travelogues,
Yeah.
Explorers describing the customs of indigenous people, this mix of fascination and disgust. They just couldn't grasp that didn't equal inferior.
Exactly. And that's something we have to be mindful of when we're studying the Picts. We can't just impose our own modern values, our ideas of what's beautiful or appropriate onto a culture that existed so long ago.
So, tattoos aside, what other hints do we get about their daily lives?
Well, from those monastic chronicles, we get glimpses of, like, agriculture, metalworking,
Okay.
which suggests a decent understanding of their environment, the resources they had. In Adamnan's writings, there's even this mention of a Pictish nobleman. He had a blacksmith make a special iron staff for St. Columba.
Oh, interesting.
And that suggests, well, a certain level of craftsmanship. Trade, even. It goes beyond that simple warrior stereotype.
Right. It's not like they were just running around with swords 24/7. They had to farm, they had to build their homes, make tools, all the things any society needs to function.
Exactly. And let's not forget their artistic skills, which, I mean, those symbol stones are amazing.
Oh, yeah.
That's not just brute force, that's creativity, a desire to leave a mark on the world.
Which, speaking of, brings us to those symbols. We kind of danced around them a bit, but I think it's time to, fully embrace the mystery.
Yeah.
Those intricate designs carved on standing stones, they're just begging to be deciphered.
Scholars have been trying to crack that code for ages. Some think they were religious symbols, others social markers, maybe even a form of writing. But, there's no Pictish Rosetta Stone, so their meaning remains a mystery.
I have to admit, the mystery is part of what makes them so fascinating, right? It's like one of those unsolved codes people spend their lives trying to figure out. But even without knowing for sure what they mean, those symbols tell us something, don't they?
Absolutely. They show incredible artistic skill, a unique way of visual communication. It's like we're catching a glimpse of how they saw the world, but we're missing that key to unlock all the secrets.
And that's what makes this whole exploration so intriguing. We're trying to understand this culture that left behind very few written records of its own. So we're relying on accounts from outsiders, people who often viewed them with, suspicion, fear, or this desire to change them. It's a challenge for sure, but it's also a chance to put on our historian hats and play detective.
Precisely. And by looking at those sources closely, remembering those biases, and considering different perspectives, we can start to build a more complete understanding of the Picts.
So let's keep digging into those sources. What else can we learn about their society, their beliefs,
Yeah.
and maybe even, how they saw themselves? Okay, so we've talked about those Roman accounts, how they saw the Picts, as these fierce warriors, almost like a force of nature.
Hmm.
And then we looked at those early Christian writings. They saw them as potential converts, souls needing saving. But it makes me wonder, how did the Picts see themselves?
Yeah. The $1 million question, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's the ultimate challenge for historians to try and understand how a culture viewed itself, especially when all you have are these bits and pieces, these interpretations from outsiders.
It's like we're trying to hear this faint whisper from centuries ago.
Yeah.
And there's so much noise,
Yeah.
so much distortion. To get to the Pict's own perspective, that's got to be tough. So how do we even start? Where do we even begin with that?
Well, first, I think we have to be very careful not to project our own ideas onto the past, like our modern values and assumptions. We can't just fill in the blanks with what we think they should have believed or how we think they should have lived.
Right, right. It'd be like trying to understand a friend's culture, but all you've got is like a tourist guidebook about their country. You get
Yeah.
some basic info, sure, but you're missing the real experience, the little things, the things that make it meaningful to them.
Exactly. And that's where those little glimpses we've been talking about, those become really important. They're like clues, right? Hints at a worldview that we can only partially reconstruct.
So let's talk clues. We've got the warrior culture, the kings and nobles, that connection to nature and spirits, and those amazing symbol stones. Those definitely show some artistic skill. So what can we take away from all of that? What's it telling us?
Well, I think taken all together, it paints a picture of a culture that was both strong and complex. I mean, the Picts held off some powerful enemies, they had complex social structures, and they had this rich artistic tradition.
So those Roman accounts, the
Yeah.
ones that focused on Pictish ferocity, maybe they weren't entirely off base,
Yeah.
but they were only seeing one part of the picture.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's like describing a lion only by its roar. You're missing so much, You're missing the grace, the power, the whole social structure of a pride.
Okay, so we've got the Picts as warriors, as artisans, as part of this complex society. What about their spiritual beliefs? Those stories about St. Columba and the Druids.
Yeah.
What are those telling us?
Well, one thing is for sure. Their beliefs were tied to the natural world. That Columba, the one that was considered poisonous to the Picts, I don't think that was just a water source. It was probably a sacred site, a place of power, maybe even a connection to the spirit world.
It's like, imagine if someone, came to your favorite childhood spot, that place that hold all these memories, all this meaning, and they decided to purify it because they just didn't get it. You'd probably be a little upset.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think it's so important to try to understand Pictish beliefs from their point of view, not just from the perspective of those missionaries who saw their beliefs as something to be wiped out.
So how do we do that? How do we bridge that gap of, 1,500 years? How do we even try to see the world through Pictish eyes?
Well, it's a bit like being a detective at a historical crime scene, you
Yeah.
know? We have to gather the clues. And those symbol stones, those are more than just pretty designs. They're like windows into their beliefs, their values.
It's like each symbol, each swirl, each mythical creature carved into those stones, they're all trying to tell us something, trying to give us a glimpse of how the Picts saw the world.
And even if we never completely understand their language, the very act of trying to listen, that in itself is a way of honoring their culture. It's a way of recognizing their humanity.
So as we wrap up this dive into the world of the Picts, I think that the main thing to remember is this. They were so much more than just warriors, more than just pagans who needed converting. They were a complex people with their own unique beliefs, their own values, their own ways of life. And while we might never fully know them just through the eyes of others, we can still get glimpses. We can look at the evidence. We can think about the biases and start to appreciate how rich and how complex their culture really was.
That's what makes history so amazing, isn't it? It's this ongoing process of discovery, of interpretation, of reinterpretation. And the more we learn, the more we realize how much is still out there.
So to everyone listening, keep exploring, keep asking those questions, keep listening for those whispers from the past. The Picts might be gone, but their story, that's still captivating, still challenging us to understand. So until next time, happy exploring, everyone.